My name is Karari Olvera. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them, and I am one of the facilitators at Praxis group, and we are a Chicago-based consulting group comprised entirely of people living at the intersections that we speak about. And so we are very much dedicated to the liberation of our communities. And when we talk about power and dynamics and privilege, transphobia, homophobia, it is because we are personally impacted by these things. And so today we are joined by three wonderful community members. And I will start off by introducing them all with their bios. So today we're joined by Jamie Frazier, who uses he, him pronouns, and he is the executive pastor of Lighthouse Church of Chicago, UCC, and executive director of the Lighthouse Foundation of Chicagoland, both institutions that center Black LGBTQ liberation. A graduate of Vanderbilt University, he is a celebrated orator in venues such as the March on Springfield for Marriage Equality and the Creating Change Conference. He has also given keynotes and presentations at research institutions such as Northwestern's Alliance for Research in Chicagoland Communities, the University of Chicago, DePaul University, and Loyola University, Chicago. Chicago Theological Seminary recognized him as an inaugural recipient of the Bayard Rustin Award for Outstanding Service and Commitment to the Work of Social Justice. His work has been featured on CNN, The Washington Post, and several local Chicago affiliates. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us today. We are also joined by Pigeon, who's currently still off camera, but will be on shortly. And Pigeon Pagones has worked over a decade as an intersex advocate, speaker, consultant, photographer, filmmaker to shed light on the human rights violations endured by intersex people. Their goal is to help and end the non-consensual, irreversible medical procedures meant to discipline unruly intersex bodies. Pigeon's accessible advocacy helps people complicate the preconceived binary notions of biological differences. Their work has been essential for those who want to show up for intersex people in their lives, but aren't sure where to start. Whether advancing the intersex cause as the co-founder of the Intersex Justice Project, co-producing viral information videos, creating art that centers intersex voices, appearing on the cover of the National Geographic Gender Revolution special issue, or being honored as an LGBT champion of change in the Obama White House. Pigeon has staked out a place at the fore of debates of intersexuality. In 2020, IJP's #EndIntersexSurgery campaign succeeded in getting Lurie's Children's Hospital to become the first hospital in the nation to apologize and halt surgeries. Their memoir, Nobody Needs to Know, was published in 2023 by Little Press, and currently they're working on getting their new feature-length documentary about intersex healing funded. Thank you so much, Pigeon, for joining us today. And last but not least, my good friend, Tania Cordova, who uses she, her pronouns, and she is the Program Director of Immigrant Legal Services and Housing Health Education at Casa Ruby. She is a member of the LGBTQ Immigrant Rights Coalition and Trans Latina Coalition. Additionally, Tania is the Director of the LGBTQ Pilot Transitional Housing at Casa Ruby. Tania is an advocate, community educator, and promotora of human rights, liberation, and universal health care, and breaking the cycles of poverty, criminalization, and imprisonment in trans, LGBTQ, and immigrant communities. Throughout the TJLP and in collaboration with the ACLU, the Chicago House, Greenberg, Torg Law Firm, and Brave Space Alliance, Tania is a part of current efforts in Illinois to reform name change legislation advocacy for the public safety of transgender people by making name change process accessible. In 2020, Tania created the Name Change Policy Coalition. In 2018, Tania formed Ser el Cambio, a nonprofit organization whose purpose is to help transgender women being released from incarceration by providing access to resources for personal and spiritual growth, transformation, and lifelong wellness. Through Ser el Cambio, she provides training and case management support for transgender immigrant women being detained and released from the Cibola Immigrant Prison in New Mexico in collaboration with the Casa Colibri Transformative Justice House in Albuquerque. Her long-term vision is an operate reentry program and transitional living organization for trans immigrant women seeking asylum and trans women of color getting released from prison in the US. Thank you so much for Tania for joining us. And obviously y'all can see these are three amazing people doing amazing work for our community. And we are truly, truly honored that y'all have joined us today on Pride, during Pride, the last week of Pride, let's get started. Now, we talk a lot about what is wrong with the world. And when we were like creating this idea for this panel, we really were trying to think of like, we always talk about like what's wrong with the world, what we have to fix. But we thought like, what about if we focus on dreaming? What if we focus on the good things? What if we focus on like what is the image we have? Because even like we can't actually have a world until we imagine it. And so to start off, describe your dream world. What does it look like, both globally, locally, but also how does it exist? How does it manifest in your everyday life? Jamie, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thank you so much, Karari. And I also want to thank Jess and Tiffany, the whole Praxis team, for having me. I feel very honored to be a part of this panel today. I got a piece of my vision of what a real world could look like at a recent Lighthouse Foundation Black Queer Beach Day, where we basically did a 63rd Street beach takeover. And you had 500 Black queer bodies on the beach in peace and unity and interdependence among our Black kin of various sexual orientations and gender identities. And I think that's a snapshot of the better world that I see, where Black, queer, and trans bodies are welcomed, accepted, and affirmed within the wider Black community. And I think even when you take a step back, the world that I see looks like interdependence across lines, not just of sexual orientation and gender identity, but also race. I think back years ago to when I was working with United Latino Pride and we were doing United Latino Pride every year. It was powerful to see Black and brown queer folks working together for our mutual liberation and shared struggle. So what I'm dreaming of are the days in which queer people can exist together and also alongside other folks of our racial and ethnic identity. So I'm not looking for any gay or queer ghettos. I'm looking for our liberation in spaces that are at times for us and by us, but also are in spaces where we coexist with other folk. And we're able to do so from a place of peace, power, wholeness, and liberation.
Thank you. I think that the whole idea of interdependence across lines, I wrote it down immediately. I was like, yes, that's I think when we talk about when we did ULP, like I was one of the organizers for United Latino Pride many years ago, and we did the intention was right that we wanted to create spaces that feel like they're ours, but also they feel like anyone can be a part of it. Everyone feels welcome. And I was honored to have you always come in and support us. And we will of course love to support y'all. Tanya, would you like to add anything else? What do you imagine your dream world looks like?
Um, well, first of all, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be a panelist. It's an honor. Um, my dream world, I think it has to be a place where everybody has to feel safe and respected, but also a world with no borders, and with every and I think the world should be all human rights should be respected, and we all should have the right to live where and how we choose to live, not how the world is right now. So I think that's how my dream world is, to be respected, not just as a trans immigrant, you know, uh, trans Latina, indigenous woman, an immigrant. And I think, through 25 years in the United States, uh, I have, it has been a struggle for trans immigrant women, and especially, when it comes to, even with all the immigration laws. And I really think that we should have the right to live everywhere and to build a house everywhere that we want to live. And we should not go to all this process to even buy a house. So that's how I actually frame.
Yeah, And I think you bring up a point, like we're talking earlier for anybody who wasn't during another pre-panel talk, that Tanya had purchased a house, and right, the idea of having to purchase a house, you know, on this earth that is like doesn't belong to anyone. It seems almost absurd that we have to go through all these loopholes just for us to be able to take a piece, you know, of this free earth, be able to call our home. It's always like this, like it seems absurd to think about it, but yet we normalize it to the point that it's just this normal thing that we have to have a lot of money to buy land that is just readily available, like because the earth is the way it is. And so I think, yeah, like the idea of like the open borders is, I think, a challenging image for a lot of people, right? The idea that there should be no borders, that we all should be able to move across this great earth as freely as we are because we're human. I think that's like a beautiful dream, and I really hope that we get there, right? Where we all can just exist and move about as needed.
Yeah, and I just gonna add something, especially when it comes to immigration, and I'm a huge advocate for, people with withholding and removal, and because I'm one of the person who has withholding and removal. Now I'm in the United States, but the United States can remove me out of this country, so that means I'm in the United States, but I'm in a cage. I cannot move out of the United States, so I really would like to have the dream where everybody can actually be free to fly to go anywhere that everywhere that we want to, and without all those borders and all those immigration restrictions.
Thank you, Tanya. Would you like to share your personal vision of what your dream world looks like globally, locally?
Yeah. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Praxis. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Jamie and Tanya before me. You guys, wow. Yeah. I really, and Karari, thank you like for saying the earth, is this resource that's supposed to be for us. And my dream world is, of course, a place where intersex people are free to be intersex, where trans people are free to just be, Black and brown people are free to exist, disabled folks have access to what they need. And that goes without being said for me. And Palestine is free, Congo is free, Sudan is free, everywhere is free, okay? So yeah, let's just say that. But I wanted to focus on something that I've been thinking about a lot more lately, which is about like land and growing food and gardening. And so I'm gonna get, my dream world is about New York City. And it was like, I got off the train, which is great. I'm glad there's a train, but I'm like, it could be so much more beautiful. And like, I come up and it's just like, there's no greenery, and it's just like the smog from the cars is on everything. And I'm like, these buildings could be covered in trees, and we could be harnessing the sun's power and like not using fossil fuels. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about. So my dream is and I'm going to read. In my dream world, everything is designed with permaculture, emergent strategy, and biomimicry at its core. Globally, it looks like a network of thriving, self-sustaining ecosystems where communities work in harmony with nature. Imagine cities that mimic the efficiency of termite mounds for cooling and heating, like they did with the Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe. Agricultural practices that draw from indigenous wisdom to regenerate the soil, and energy systems inspired by sunflowers' tracking of the sun. Locally, neighborhoods would be lush with community gardens, green roofs, and urban forests, all designed to support biodiversity and local food production. People would use small, incremental changes to continuously adapt and improve their environments, drawing from the principles of emergent strategy. Decisions would be made collaboratively, embracing the wisdom of the people and the resilience of decentralized systems. In my day-to-day life, I'd be part of a vibrant community where we grow our own food, harvest rainwater, and generate energy sustainably. Our homes would be built using materials and designs inspired by nature, ensuring they are efficient and harmonious with the environment. We prioritize small acts of care and connection, knowing that every action, no matter how small, contributes to the larger system. By integrating the principles of permaculture, emergent strategy, and biomimicry, we'd create a world that's not only sustainable, but also deeply connected, resilient, and full of life. This dream world is a place where humans and nature coexist and thrive together, consciously learning and evolving in response to each other's needs. So that's what I wanted to say about my dream world. It would be, I think that would be the foundation, and then I would add things on top of it, but I think those things would actually come a lot easier if we all had food, a shelter, safety, and community and connection.
It's like definitely like I'm just like I close my eyes and I'm just like kind of imagining it, you know. I'm like kind of as you're talking, I'm describing like this would be like it would be so beautiful. Like Chicago's a beautiful city, and if there was just more greenery, it would be a much more beautiful city. Like truly, there's just some places that are just not, there's not enough. There's not enough greenery, and there's also this notion that that somehow we have to control nature, right? And it's just, and a lot of it comes from this idea that if you can control nature, that you can control people, right? It's just all those things just kind of compound on it. And if you let nature exist and in like unison, then I think it becomes easier to understand how people can exist in unison. If something as like, if you can't have a conversation with nature, right, and yet still exist in unison, you probably can, you know, have a conversation with people and exist in unison much easier than it is with nature. Yeah, that's, and so like, how do we get there? Like, why is it so difficult sometimes for us to even dream of these possibilities? Because I think when I was like drafting these questions, I was trying to answer them myself, right? And I was struggling a little bit because I knew that like the talking points, right? We know the talking points of like no racism, no this, no that. And it's a very no-based idea of what the dream world is. It's just like no, 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 no. But it's like, well, where are the yeses? What does it actually look like? And it felt very difficult for me to even like start like getting past the no's and starting the yes. And so why do y'all think it is such a difficult thing for many of us to imagine better worlds?
I'd really like to thank Pigeon for writing and sharing that. I'm like, when are you writing the book and recording it so I can listen to it on Audible at night to reawaken some new possibilities after I've watched MSNBC all day? And I think in your articulation, you gave the first step to co-creating this world, which is to commit it to paper. I think there's something powerful about writing the vision of the world that we want to see and being able to expand to that document as you continue to live, grow, thrive. I also think that when we talk about co-creating a new world, often the reason we start with not this, not that, is because when you're on the margins, you're quite clear about what you don't want and what you don't want to face. But it becomes a little bit more difficult to think about where are the seeds of newness being planted right now? You know, not just this huge, big pie in the sky vision, but where are these things unfolding right now? And how do we tap in to things in their nascent stage? How do we feed those things? Also, how do we connect those things? Chicago is an exciting city, and there's revitalization efforts happening in Inglewood and in Humboldt Park and in Pilsen. How do you connect these kind of silos of revitalization into an ecosystem? How do we learn from what folks are doing on different parts of the city, as well as different parts of the globe? It's about, I think, writing down the vision. It's about looking for the seeds, the infancy of revolution, of newness in other spaces. Thirdly, it's about connecting, transformation, as it's happening across the city, across the state, the nation, the globe. And the last thing that I wanted to say is, as someone who's very committed to therapy, one thing that my therapist often will ask is the magic question. What would your life be without limitations? Imagine, for an example, you didn't have any of the stressors that are confronting you right now. How would you live? How would you love? How would you exist? And that is the question that I think we need to ask ourselves as queer people of color every morning that we wake up, so that it gives us the ability to not merely be confined to the way life is, but to the way we want to co-create the world to be. What does a life without limits look like? And write that shit down and find out other people who share that vision and connect those visions, because it's that web of mutuality, that web of revolution that has the opportunity to really remake the world into the way we want it to be.
I am literally writing this shit down. I was like, commit to paper, write that shit down. It's gonna be on my wall now, Jamie. Thank you. Thank you for that. What about y'all? Like, what makes it so difficult for us to dream?
Well, Vision, I actually have the opportunity to meet Vision like 6 years ago, when I was doing work with for TJP. And I mean, yeah, I think right now, yes, live by example, and I've been going with the flow, and I've been fulfilling my destiny. Um, I'm a farmer. I grew up on a farm. I was raised on a farm, and for many years I was disconnected because I've been living in a city, but now that I recently bought my house, and I'm farming, and I'm planting, and I have my seeds, my tomatoes, my chiles, and all the stuff, and also right here in Baltimore, there's other nonprofit organizations that they do farming, and they're actually educated citizens, who lives in the city to actually farm. We cannot live without food, and food comes from from the ground. We're not gonna be surviving in fields and water that is toxic. So we actually reconnect with nature and respect nature and respect our mother earth. Then we're gonna create this magical, world that we need to preserve, right? So I did, I have to be very grateful. I'm right here, right by the ocean, and the rivers, and it's green. And in December, I was thinking to move back to Chicago. And then when I went to Chicago, and I was, going through the whole process, meeting with a realtor, and then I was like, am I gonna come back to the city? Am I really want to live in the city? And then I decided, destiny shift me to a different way, and I ended up being in this, the area in Baltimore, which is very green. So for me, being in the mountains and the river, and then being able to be connected with farmers, that they actually, they being they have to be sustainable by uh, people who actually donate their time to go and farm and harvest, But people in the city, we don't want to do that. We don't want to farm. We don't want to do it our hands. We don't want to do anything. We want somebody actually to go into the work and bring those, vegetables to our table, those fruits to our table, but we don't want to contribute, right? So, yeah, I think that, even in even in Chicago and some cities, people from other countries like Asian people, they're trying to, have a pot, to have a little piece of land, and they grow beans and cucumbers. So what is growing? What's growing? What is wrong with humankind that we don't want to farm, or we don't want to plant those seeds? So we just want to go and harvest, but we don't, and we want to eat, but we don't want to plant the seeds.
I think it's like almost a metaphor, Tanya, right? This idea like our resistance to cultivating our own food and cultivating the earth is very much our resistance to cultivating change. Like we love when I'm sure there's many of us in the community who were like, as soon as gay marriage was legal, it's like they planned their wedding and they went out, but they weren't there to like fight for it, right? It didn't, and I think so many of us have this same resistance, right? That we don't want to cultivate change because it's hard. You have to get dirty. You have to, stick your hands in the earth, and sometimes you fail and sometimes you succeed. And I think it is this resistance that I think we have in many, many ways. And I think that resistance is keeping us from even dreaming, because if you don't even start, or like Jamie said, right, if you don't commit to actually writing it down, commit to actually doing it, you can't actually get anywhere.
Thank you. My answer is that I think it's really hard by design. I think going off of what Tanya said, I think for me personally, I had resistance to it and I hated it until I actually started doing it. So I think a lot of us don't even know how good it feels to be in the dirt and to use that metaphor, to be in community fighting for change with each other. Because a lot of us by design have not had access to growing our own food, or literally growing our own or nurturing our own communities or within our communities. So I think it's hard by design. And I think part of growing up in our society is the process of getting the child beat out of us. And the child is who has the imagination. So that our imagination is also beat out of us. I think imagination is a key and central part of anyone's art making process. And art is a threat to the state. The state and the status quo that props it up relies on the smothering of our inner children and our imagination. Without a flourishing of many without many people's imagination within a society, states weigh us, ideas that are firmly rooted in our imagination. So I think our schools and the jobs that usually come after, they require us to replace our imagination and our childlike sense of wonder, because those are exactly the tools that artists and other people use to challenge the state and the status quo. So I think that's one reason why it's so hard for us to dream of other possibilities.
Thank you so much. I immediately wrote that down, right? Because like one of my questions is like what recalibrates us? Like how y'all have been doing this work, y'all have been tireless in your advocacy for the many communities that you represent, but also the communities that you don't represent, because a lot of work, as Jamie had said earlier, right, it's about fostering interdependence across lines. And so my question to y'all is like, what grounds your work? What has centered your work, to keep the land metaphor, right? What grounds your work? What recenters it? But also adding this component that Pigeon introduced, like what brings you back to your child, to that child of cultivation? How do you get there again? Whoever wants to start first. How do you recalibrate? How do you recenter when sometimes the world just knocks us down?
Well, I can go first. It has been multiple times, right, that I have to be grounded and work, life can knock me down. But I cannot stay on the floor, and I cannot wait for somebody who actually come and pick me up. So, and then, I think self-care, I've been practicing self-care when it's time for me to say, you know what, this is just about Tanya, and reconnect with my inner child, right? And my inner self, as Karari knows, and many people actually knows, I'm a practitioner of the Yoruba culture, with they call santeria. So being a spiritual has been helped me to actually get grounded and recalibrated. Not easy, to be honest. And especially work, for the work that we do, especially with direct services. And when you doing direct services and you see the struggle of different communities and different families and the LGBT community, which is our family, and we need to be there to support them. But we also have to understand that we all should be come together, because what I have seen in the LGBT community, just like L goes this direction, B goes this direction, and we're not really together, and we're not really showing the support and the love with that we all deserve. And if we don't actually come together as an LGBTQ community and family, we're not gonna be able to be sustainable, right? We're gonna, damn, Tanya is gonna be, well, Tanya now doesn't want to talk to nobody, and Tanya is gonna do what Tanya wants to do, and she don't want to respect the other person or love the other person. So damn, that's family separation. So in order for me to recalibrate it and to be grounded, I have to feel the love and the support as a LGBTQ family.
Thank you.
Karari, you asked such an interesting question. How do we remain grounded? And in many respects, I think the question that I find myself asking is, how do I remain lifted? Like, I feel
Ooh.
like the forces of oppression are constantly grounding me and keeping my feet tethered to the earth. And so when it's time for me to actively dream, my question is, how am I lifted? And I think there are a lot of ways that that happens. I'm lifted through unabashed joy. I'm lifted through a good blunt at the end of the day. I'm lifted through Afrocentrism, and I'm lifted through Afrofuturism. Like, I think of the book Octavia's Brood Science Fiction Stories from Social Justice Movements. And one of the writers says this: because all organizing is science fiction, we are dreaming new worlds every time we think about the changes we want to make in the world. One of the ways I remain lifted and high is by dreaming and creating something new. And one of the things that I love about the organization where I serve, Lighthouse Foundation, is that we're constantly dreaming of new ways of being, of living, of loving. We're looking at events like the Black LGBTQ plus prom, which is all about reclaiming prom, being able to wear the clothes that you want to wear and go with the person or the people that you want to go with. I think about Black Queer Beach Day, taking up public space on the South Side among our wider Black kin. I think about our workforce development conference, where we asked the question in a workshop, what do you need to learn about business? And the title of the workshop answers it. Everything I needed to learn about business, I learned from drag. We have to find new and creative ways to lift ourselves from the complacency and also from the averageness that the world will try to call us to. It takes a little extra to be queer. It takes a little extra to be free. It takes a little extra to be lifted. And that's what I need from community. That's what I need from programming. That's what I need also from community-led participatory research, asking those on the margins to create solutions that, of course, will work for us, but also will work for everyone. Like, these are the ways that I keep dreaming and remain lifted and keep my feet off the ground when I live in a world that is constantly trying to put my feet in the muck and mire, because a sedentary person has trouble dreaming.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie, for taking us to church on this fine day. That definitely, that's making me think, right? Like, I'm going to change it. The idea of why do I need to be grounded? You're right. Like, why do we have to be tethered? I should be lifted. I'm gonna start definitely thinking in terms of that, Jamie. Thank you so much for all of that. Pidge, anything you'd like to
Yeah.
share? What centers you? What brings you back to that child? What
Jamie,
elevates you?
I heard you were called a pastor, right? Are you a pastor?
I am. I'm a pastor and an executive director.
All right, please drop the location of the church in the chat. Because I want to go to your church. So my answer to that question, what has centered my community work and how do I recalibrate and recenter when the world knocks me off my feet? I got into the community work by just being intersex and having the experience of what happens to a person whose body dares to imagine what a body can be outside of the binary, and how the world or the society, this is the status quo that we have right now in this country, how it reacted to my body by trying to destroy those most intimate parts of my body to keep the binary intact, to squash that imagination of something else. So I started speaking out. I started sharing my story with this youth-like belief, which is a beautiful belief, that if I just share my story, then the surgeries against intersex people would surely end and everything would be good because everyone would hear how bad it is. And that didn't happen. So I had to keep sharing my story and sharing my story and sharing my story. And I used to sign off my YouTube videos with a saying that said, intersex stories, not surgeries. And I have been thinking about that. In the past 15 plus years, sharing my story has actually done. It has taken a huge toll on me mentally and physically, emotionally, etc. And I look back and I'm kind of sad that I've ushered in a generation of people in a way where I was trying to encourage them to share their stories, because I wasn't aware yet of how draining it can be to be in story-based activism, sharing your story, your trauma over and over and over again. This is why recently I kind of wanted to quit activism and the whole intersex thing for a while. I was burnt out. But I realized that I just want to approach it differently moving forward. And the way I want to approach it differently is to center healing in everything that I do moving forward. So I'm working, for instance, one of the ways I'm doing that is I'm working on a new documentary that is all about intersex and healing. And as you said in my bio, I'm trying to get that funded. So if anybody wants to help fund that documentary, please let me know. The link is in my Instagram bio, or hit me up. But this documentary is going to be different than any other intersex documentary or piece that's ever been put out, because I will not be asking anybody in the film about their surgeries, their trauma, their pain at all. In fact, if they speak about it on their own, which I had happen recently, I'll probably just mute that part out. For too long, intersex people have felt like they had to spill their blood, their pain, to be worth being in front of someone and telling their story, myself included. And so I want to ask different questions in this documentary. I want to ask about, how are you finding joy? How are you able to still laugh? And how are you attempting to heal? And so and this is all because I want to know how to do it myself. So I'm going to go on a journey doing it. And so how do I recenter? Like I said, I wanted to drop out of this work, and I was burnt out, especially when I was writing my book alone. And that was really, really hard. But one of the biggest places for me to recenter right now is my garden, which is why I was talking about permaculture earlier. I'm born and raised in Chicago, know nothing about farms, Tanya, like you. And I just started gardening this year, and I was picking weeds and bending over, and I was sweating, and I hated it. I was like, my back hurt, everything hurt. I hated it. I was like, everyone wants to garden until they garden. And that was like what I was saying to myself. And then slowly I started to actually love it and miss it when I wasn't home picking weeds or gardening and growing food and learning about these things. So one of the biggest places for me to recenter is now with my hands in the earth, with plants. The lake in Chicago is one of my favorite places. I love water as a healing place for me. I love healing modalities like sound healing, meditations, Reiki, acupuncture, all of those things. I love trying all of those things. Like Jamie, I love a good drug, like weed doesn't work well for me, sadly, anymore. But I have gotten into different drugs like psychedelics, MDMA, and ketamine has been very helpful for me on my healing journey. By the way, a lot of insurance covers ketamine. Mine did, and it was great. And I went to Rush in Chicago for that. And I love dancing and just movement with good music and being in community. I've seen a lot of talk about self-care lately and how Audre Lorde's quotes around self-care, and how she talked about it being also self-care is a revolutionary act, so you can still show up for community. And it's also doing work within the community is self-care because it revitalizes us and refuels us. So being in community is also really healing for me as well. And I forgot to say earlier, a lot of the things I was talking about in my dream world were inspired by people like Adrienne Marie Brown, who I know was also a part of Octavia's Brood. I think that writing of that book. So her concepts around, well, not just her concepts, because she gathered them from other people, as she notes, but the biomimicry I speak about, permaculture, and other things I spoke about were from other people. I was not coming up with those things. And I forgot to mention the name of the book that I'm really inspired by lately, which is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown.
Yeah, we always in our workshops at Praxis, we always start off with like the hashtag cite Black women. So like definitely like so much of the work that we in just dreaming the world is often based on the work of Black women, and definitely mentioning it is important. You mentioned your book, Pidge, and so my like question, because you said how like, sharing your story just became exhausting, right? So what is the role of the artist then in creating this new world? If we want to also not drain the artist of their blood entirely, as you said in your like the metaphor of draining and bleeding, then what is the role of the artist in shaping new worlds?
I think artists, any type, I think dancers, I think musicians, I think they have a direct connection, or they're tapped into other things that's always present, but some of us have lost touch with. Me, myself, I'm trying to get more tapped into it because I look at artists around me and I'm like, God damn, I wish I had that communication with whatever you call it, something spiritual, something source, God, something. There is this direct communication. And I think the role of the artist, I mean, I don't think they have to do anything that they don't want to do, but I think it would be nice. The role of the artist could be helping people find their inner children and their imaginations. Because I think this is a powerful tool against the status quo that thrives upon the suppression of these things that I talked about earlier. I think artists have power. Oh, and this is again from social media. I found this on social media thanks to Monica Trinidad sharing this recently, who is a local artist and cultural worker in Chicago. That the ruling class understands that artists have power. And there is a person named Alex Arelia they said on social media that they cut funding for the arts so that you could never imagine a way out of capitalism. And so I think the role of the artist is to always inspire us, to push us, to help us remember our inner children and our imaginations, because that is how we help others imagine our way out of the status quo, which is a word I was using for things like capitalism, racism, sexism, transphobia, etc. I think that's the role of the artist, is to help us all remember who we are, like to bring Peter Pan, like it's like to get us back to our Peter Pan, like when we remember who we were as children.
Thank you. And the name of your book, so that anybody who wants to Google it.
The name of my book is funny because it's called Nobody Needs to Know. And it's by me, Pigeon Pagonis, and it's about my story growing up intersex. It's a memoir.
Thank you, Pigeon, for sharing. And thank you so much for sharing your stories. Honestly, it's like I remember, yeah, like I'm an elder millennial, so definitely I was chronically online on like YouTube and all those things. And I remember running across like your videos and just like you were for a while, you were really everywhere sharing your story to whoever would listen. And it was, I think it helped people understand things that, we didn't always know. And so I thank you for that work. I thank you for everything that you've done and to continue to do, because we still see your videos on Instagram and I still like always make sure I watch everything you post. Because I learn as somebody who's not intersex. As a trans person, our struggles are tied to each other, but also are very, very different and need to be acknowledged as such. So thank you for that work. Jamie, since you've been taking us to church all day, I'm gonna come back to you. So, you are a pastor. You are a pastor of Lighthouse Church, and you're executive director of the Lighthouse Foundation. And so, how does your faith inform your like advocacy and your work to create this ideal world?
Let me first say that I recognize Christianity and the church and scripture have been weaponized in some really heinous ways against Black bodies, brown bodies, birthing bodies, trans bodies, queer bodies. And so I began with that first acknowledgement. The second thing that I will say is I've really been able to embrace Christianity even more as I too am an elder millennial because of the core concepts that ground me in my faith. I think one of those core concepts is the transness of God. I have a Trinitarian understanding of God. God as creator, God as sustainer, and also God as savior. And so when I look at God, I see a God, when we talk about the Holy Spirit in Hebrew, ruach is feminine. And so when we think about the Holy Spirit, I think of a Black grandmama. When I think of God as savior, I see Jesus as a man. When I think of God as creator, I think of God as father, God as mother, and also God as divine other that exists outside of the binary. One of the ways that we might think of transness is when one's identification does not match other people's observation or other people's description. And I think that's very true of God. I think often we think of God as this white man in the sky, but when we think of God as spirit, as woman, when we think of God as divine other, divine parent existing outside of the binary, it opens up a lot of possibilities. And one of the reasons I talk often about the transness of God is because often the people who are killing trans bodies are those that are operating from a very limited, myopic, death-dealing view of God. And when we can see the transness of God, then we can also see the God in trans people. Another thing that I'll say that grounds me in my Christian faith is I'm a part of a community that is unabashedly Black, queer, and we have a hell of a lot of accomplices. Other queer people of color that have found spiritual community there, white folks that have found spiritual community there because shit, they're tired of their white supremacy. And so they want to come be free. It has been beautiful to be challenged by community because often in the trappings of church, there is authority that's given to the pastor by virtue of their position. I can assure you that that is not the case at Lighthouse Church, that authority is derived not by position, but by relationship, by trust, by relational investment. And that is a constant check on my own ego, that I don't get any credibility by the title that I wear or the degree that I hold or the credential that I possess. I gain credibility and authority from my community to the extent that they trust in me and to the extent that I serve them well. And that is a mentality that I think would serve us well in the world at large, giving us a place of humility. And the last thing that I would say about my community that grounds me is we're constantly thinking about how do we show up and serve outside of the four walls of the church. Too often in Christianity, I think the message is let's get people into a building rather than let's get out of the building and love creation, be in solidarity with those who are oppressed, seek liberation, clothe folk, feed folk. And so that's why all of Lighthouse Foundation's events that we do in the public are free. Even our annual fundraising on Gala, everybody can get one free ticket to that. Is that we can live out our faith in the public square through the work of the foundation without even talking about Jesus, but instead trying to live out Jesus' tenets of generosity and kindness and fucking up the power structure. Those are all kind of principles that I take with me. So it's not just that I believe in Jesus, but there is a particular expression of Christianity that I have found in Lighthouse Church UCC that is Black, that is queer, that is liberatory, that resonates with me.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And also want to, just give a shout out to Nestor, who's been interpreting this entire time. Thank you, Nestor, so much. Also, if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit. I do have one final question for Tanya, just as like a balance, right? Because you also are informed by your faith, right? By your spirituality, Tanya. And so like, how does your spiritual connection to your, like the traditions that you have and you hold and you practice, how does that inform your work also?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and I believe, I'm Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe, I'm a believer. I believe in God, and the God that I know is not a white man, like that Jamie was saying. For me, is in the spirit that is a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, and it's full of love, not of revenge, not of oppression. And that's not what I believe. And I had the opportunity to be initiated into the Yoruba religion by Miss Kiri Tianga, and Janet Namer, that they were their, they passed the legacy. So now I have to continue with my legacy as a Yoruba priest. But everything is about spirituality, and everything is about love and understanding and liberation. I think for me, just like teaching, I become an activist. For many years, I was living under the shadows, right? And as a kid, it was more don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. That I was oppressed to be actually being the artist that I am, right? So now in the future, like in the second generation, like my nieces and nephews, they allow their kids to express themselves. And for me, and when it comes to my family, I know that I'm doing that I did the right thing, but being able to break or change the shackles and be able to change, not only in my family when it comes to to accept or a person of the LGBT community and my family, but and the world. And then when it comes to prison evolution, I totally believe that there's a lot of work that I still have to do when it comes to as a prison abolitionist, because all those wounds had to break me into many pieces, right? And a shame, and it's just like a puzzle, and I have to come together and try to find out those pieces in order for me to continue creating change in every single person that it comes to me, seeking for spirituality, seeking for guidance, seeking for a word of acceptance. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm glad you mentioned like Miss Kitty and Janet Namer, right? These are two trans women who were like really an important part of the Santeria Yoruba community, like in Chicago, and to like the idea that we're not always excluded, right? Sometimes we are very much a part of these spiritual communities, and we want to change that narrative that spirituality and religion is not for us, because really, like in many ways, it was created by us, right? And so thank you so much for like uplifting those two Latina women who are no longer with us, but their impact is obviously still present through the work that you're doing, both community-wise and spiritually. So thank you, Tanya.
And even, I just have to add, and even in the Yoruba religion, trans women, gay people they will accept it, and it was okay. But for a trans woman to be initiated into the religion, it wasn't accepted. So Janet Namer actually came and changed the dynamic of acceptance. And Kitty Tiangua, who was the first trans woman who was living as a trans woman to be initiated as in the Yoruba religion. So, and I think now for me, I have to continue the legacy and even to advocate for the LGBT community, and any kind of culture or religion that I think, gender, sexual orientation, and race, it should not be ever an obstacle to be part of a religious culture.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you all so much for sharing with us this, like your wonderful just existence. Thank you so much for your wonderful words. We want to make sure that everyone knows that we will be emailing everybody who came to our panel and to watch. You'll be getting a recording via your email. So if you want to spread the word and pass on the words of these wonderful panelists, please do so. Also, we encourage you all in the chat or through email to send us what your liberatory dreams look like. What do they feel like for you? And if you like, on our social media pages. Again, I am Karari Olvera, joined today by Tania Cordova, Jamie Fraser, and Pigeon Pagonis. And this has been a Pride panel by Praxis. If you'd like to follow us, we are at Praxis social media platform. Once again, everyone, thank you so much. And thank you once again to my good friend Nestor, who interpreted this entire panel. Thank you all once again. And finally, I'm so happy to have you in community. Happy Pride, everyone.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everyone.
Bye, everybody.